Stephanie Giannini here from IVATI, and today I'm bringing you an episode of IVATI Invites, where we invite leaders from all different walks of life to share their story and for us to learn from them. Today I have a very special guest, Allison Knight. She's an educator from Atlanta, Georgia, and more importantly, she's one of my very best friends from college, and I'm lucky enough to have her here to interview her in person. So why don't we start off by telling everybody a little bit about what you do as an educator, where you're from, all the good stuff.
Sure. So I am from Oakland Park, Kansas. I was raised there, did my entire K-12 education in Blue Valley schools. I then moved on to Arizona State University, where I majored in psychology with a minor in Spanish. I graduated from there in 2015, and I then relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, where I currently reside. I work in public charter school education, elementary education, where I first started as a kindergarten teacher and eventually made my way up in leadership roles, and now I serve as a kindergarten teacher at a public charter school in East Point, Georgia.
Why don't you start off by giving us your whole journey into education? Because I know it's not something you necessarily set out to do.
Right. As I mentioned, when I was at Arizona State University, I did not major in education. I majored in psychology and I minored in Spanish. I always knew that I liked working with children, but never really had any of that formal experience working with children. And I kind of just landed on an opportunity in my senior year of college, where I started out as a preschool teacher. And so that was kind of my first introduction into working with children, and I realized, hey, maybe this is something I can end up doing as a career. So I took a step out on faith and I applied for a job in Atlanta, Georgia as a charter school teacher, as a kindergarten teacher, and I applied and I accepted a position as a partner teacher. And that first year, on my first day of school, my lead teacher, who I was supposed to be learning from, actually quit. So it was my first day of school as an educator ever, and I was kind of thrown into the classroom without any formal training or formal experience. So as you can imagine, that first year was fun but challenging and lots of hurdles and things like that. But I quickly realized that it felt right to me, and this is something that I wanted to come back to and keep doing. So after that first year, I decided that I was in it, and so I took initiative of my own learning, and I enrolled in different professional development opportunities and kind of owned my own learning because I knew I wanted to be an educator.
So I know you went into your education journey, which kind of encompasses your leadership journey, but I know that you have found yourself in leadership roles in the traditional sense, so the traditional leadership title. So can you tell me a little bit more about your leadership journey as far as education?
Sure. So as I mentioned, that first year when I was kind of thrown into the classroom, it took a lot of different character skills. So I had to be gritty, I had to be humble, I had to be willing to ask lots of questions. I think at the school where I was at, because about halfway through the school year, I realized, as I mentioned, that I knew this is what I wanted to do. The senior leadership and the administration at my school realized those character skills that I had exhibited, and they took to them. And so they quickly came to me after my second year as a classroom teacher and said, hey, Miss Knight, we notice you're gritty. You're willing to do the work. You are willing to make mistakes. You are willing to show up every single day, even when the day before in the classroom it might have been hot on fire. And so it was those character skills that kind of led me to the opportunity to have a more formal leadership title. And so in my third year of education, I was offered the position as a grade level chair. And so in that role as a formal leader, I was able to lead grade team meetings with my team of 8 other teachers. I was able to lead data internalization meetings. I was able to do a little bit of coaching with some of the teachers, even though myself, I had only been in education for 3 years. And so it was really that third year of teaching, my first year as a grade level chair, when I started to develop my tool belt as a formal leader in education. And so then I continued in that role for 2 more years, and then in my 5th year, I transitioned to that same role, but across 2 grade levels. And then simultaneously, the structure of my school system, they had restructured that position, so I was now removed from the classroom. And so I spent most of my day in my third year of education outside of the classroom, doing observations on teachers and then providing feedback, popping in and out of classrooms, supporting teachers almost with whatever they needed. And so that was my first time as a true leader outside of the classroom. I had 10 teachers underneath me who would come to me for questions, for feedback, for coaching, how to deal with parents, how to, make sure that their classroom is mastering a certain standard and things like that. And so that was really my first time of having that formal leadership experience, which then led me to be able to develop that skill and move into some different roles in the school building.
And what I love about your story is that it shows the journey. And I don't think people often see the journey, especially when people are in traditional leadership titles. I don't think people understand that a lot of people don't necessarily set out to be in those titles. There are people who do, but it sounds like you very much went through the experience of an emergent leader. You kind of emerged in the sense of these new experiences, taking on opportunities. You had these natural born traits that somebody else also saw in you and gave you the opportunity, and you took it. So with that being said, how would you describe yourself as a leader now that you've kind of formed your leadership identity more?
Sure. So one thing that I know about myself as a leader, and even feedback that I've often gotten from colleagues and people who I've coached and people who I have led, is they always tell me I'm the leader who's willing to do the work. So whenever anything happens, I am right there next to my teachers troubleshooting the problem. Whenever there is a behavior issue in the classroom, I am right there next to the teacher troubleshooting the problem. For myself, because I kind of shared my experience as my first year in education, I unfortunately had a leader who wasn't right there next to me. So it was really hard for me to, one, trust what they were saying, and two, it was almost as if like you don't even really understand what's going on. Because sure, it's easy for you to coach me like this and tell me to do this, but you don't know what's actually happening because you don't see me every day. And so after I found myself developing as a leader in the school building, I reflected a lot on that experience. And because I had been raised and deemed as a natural born leader, I could take pieces of that leadership advice and get to where I was today, but I had always committed to being that leader who was right there next to the person whoever I was coaching. I present myself in a way of, yes, I'm a leader in a formal sense, so I'm going to essentially tell you what to do, but it's nothing I wouldn't do myself. And I think that has allowed my team and the people who I've coached to really trust me and feel as if I'm on their team and I'm on their side, and it's not like a top-down leadership of me just telling them what to do without actually going through it myself.
I think that is so important, and I think a lot of organizations are moving towards that style of leadership, very much shared leadership versus a hierarchy. If you're in a formal leadership role, never forget that if you can't do the job that those you are leading, you will never be an effective leader. And even when you say it comes to trust, it also comes to respect. They're not going to respect you as a leader. They're not going to take advice from you very well. And it takes a lot of reflection and humbleness to know that you're there right next to them. You're there to help them, because there's nothing worse than somebody at the top trying to tell you what to do, and they're so far removed.
Absolutely.
So I think that's extremely valuable and very important as a leader. So I understand now you're in a new school from where you started, and you're no longer in that traditional leadership role. But what's valuable about that is that you never really stopped being a leader. So how have you translated your leadership identity, your leadership skills, even though you're not in a traditional role as a leader anymore?
So actually the school that I am working at currently has only been open for 3 years. And so that within itself has allowed and created a lot of opportunities for me to lead informally. And while we have a school leader and an executive director and a senior administrative leadership team, because I have had previous formal leadership experience and I've expressed my interest in leadership, I've been given some different opportunities for informal leadership in my current school. So that kind of appears in a couple of different ways. One thing is because of COVID-19, obviously we've transitioned to virtual learning, which is new for not just my school, but everyone.
Yes, definitely.
Everyone. And so I voluntarily meet with our eSchool team. I just kind of sit at a round table and we bounce best practices, what's working, what's not working. And I'm fortunate to be in a school where I feel like the senior leaders with the official titles really listen to what I have to say and value what I have to say.
As a leader, since it's now built within you, you're always wanting to pay it forward. You're always wanting to take what you've learned, your experiences, and provide somebody else the tools where they may not have to go through that or may not have to be as hard. And I think that's the epitome of a leader. What's the point of these tough experiences, these great tools you learn, these skills, if you're not willing to share it with somebody and lead somebody with you, bring somebody with you, bring them up? I think that's so valuable, and that shows that it's really ingrained with you. So as we've spoken, you definitely are more of a natural born leader and you've gained some skills. So what skills didn't necessarily come natural to you or needed to be more fine-tuned through your leadership journey?
Definitely. As I first started as a leader, these were honestly things that I didn't even realize I was lacking, and it almost took some tough situations for me to realize I needed coaching around specific things. One thing for me specifically is crucial conversations and having to have those tough conversations, giving that tough feedback. Especially in an education sense, I know you know because you worked in schools before, but the kind of relationships that you form with people in school buildings are very close-knit, tight-knit relationships, and even people I would consider my friends.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a struggle and something I continue to work on, as how do I tell my friend, hey, that was not good, or hey, that lesson that you taught probably isn't landing with kids. So I'm continuously, as a leader, being led by my coach in how to have effective, crucial conversations. Even when it comes to things like, hey, you missed a deadline, or hey, because you failed to submit your lesson plans, now the entire team is suffering because of you. And I think naturally I'm a pretty conflict avoidant person. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so I'm just having to continuously grow and practice what that looks like to be able to have a conversation and give that crucial feedback, adjusting feedback, and also making sure that I present it in a way to where the person who I'm giving the feedback to understands I'm telling you this or we're doing this so we can be better. When I do have these crucial conversations, I always start off and close with, very blatantly saying like, this is not punitive, this is not to hurt you. I am saying this because I want you to be better, because when you're better, our kids are better. But understanding truly, I'm having this tough conversation. This conversation might even be tough for me to have, and I'm very honest and vulnerable in saying that, but then grounding it back into why we're having this conversation is for the kids, point blank, period.
I love that. You touched on some really important things, especially the first thing you touched on is boundaries. And they're so hard. I think we're very personable people. For those who don't know us, I would say we're both very personable people. And I know even in my own role, I love to get to know the people I work with. I want to know about your families, your dog, your kids, what you did this weekend. But it does sometimes, and I had to learn as a young leader, I had to learn how to create those boundaries where if I did have to have those conversations, it made it not as tough or not as personal. I think sometimes people think being a leader is making everyone happy, or being a leader is that everyone likes you. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy because you want people to get better. So every leader in their development has had moments that have maybe threatened their leader identity or made them question their leadership abilities. Have you ever had any moments like that?
I was in charge of leading a professional development session around guided reading, which is, individualized small group reading for scholars. And I had overestimated the level of familiarity that my teachers had with this part of our curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so I led a session to our entire staff, about 45 staff members at the time, and basically the information that I was giving them was just way over their heads. Luckily, I had some colleagues who were friends and felt comfortable with me that they had the opportunity to kind of lead up, and they gave me some feedback afterwards of saying, hey, great intent, but I don't think anybody sitting in that room could understand what you were talking about. At the time, I was delivering this professional development session to a group of brand new teachers. And so because I was a new leader myself, I didn't necessarily take the time to make sure that I was delivering the instruction in a way that they would understand. Not saying that I needed to dumb it down, but understand their level of experience, their level of familiarity with the specific portion of the curriculum that I was talking about. But because I had those friends and those colleagues who gave me that feedback, I actually had the opportunity to represent that session. And so I made sure when I went back my second time that I thought back to myself as a first-year educator. So that was a really impactful moment for me in terms of my leadership and making sure that I am thinking about the different levels of experience that my audience has. So definitely after that first session, I had to really make sure that I thought through the audience of who I was presenting to make sure that the information could land with whoever I was presenting to.
And I think what's very important about that story is you as a leader were able to take feedback. And not everyone's ready for that. There are a lot of leaders, they think because they're the leader, they're supposed to know everything, and that is not what a leader is. You are supposed to create relationships with those that you're leading and create trust where you empower them to give you feedback. I've been in situations like that where you like put so much effort in something and it just completely goes over somebody's head.
Absolutely.
And you were able to, as a leader, have enough confidence in yourself and trust in yourself that, okay, I can still be better and I can learn from others. And the fact that they were able to come to you and share that says a lot about you as a leader. So we talk a lot about when you're leading with adults. Now, I kind of want to switch the conversation and talk about how your leadership experience with adults translates to how you lead your children. Because yes, you're teaching your children, but being a teacher is being a leader. I mean, that is what you're doing. You're leading the future. So how does it translate over?
Sure. So for me specifically, I work with lower elementary. So as I mentioned, I work with, as you know, kindergartners and first graders. I worked with second graders before, but those young children who this is their first time in school, this is their first time being outside in the world, outside of pre-K or daycare and things like that. And so really having to push myself as a leader, as an educator, as a person, and understanding that I have at any time 20 to sometimes 50 to sometimes an entire grade level's worth of children, eyes who are watching me, who are listening to me, who are looking at me and seeing how I respond to different situations, who are learning how to stay calm under pressure, who are learning how to have respectful conversations at all times. And so it really kind of pushes me to be really aware, but also to be extremely vulnerable and also make sure that I'm being genuine and true to who I am. And I think the times when I've found myself most successful in my classrooms is when I'm just myself, right? Because yes, I'm a leader, and yes, my students are looking to me and listening to me, but I make mistakes. There are days when I've pronounced words wrong, or I've kind of completely forgotten what I was supposed to be doing, and being able to be vulnerable and genuine in those situations. It's just always been kind of like at the forefront of my teaching yes, I am an educator, so of course I teach my students how to read, how to write, how to do math, but I'm also teaching them how to survive in the world. As I mentioned, how do I respond when I'm flustered? How do I bring myself back when I get knocked down? I lost the assessments, how do I adjust? And so just leading in that way of leading by example almost, and also knowing for me that doesn't mean being perfect, but being vulnerable and being resilient. I think especially for the population of children that I serve, resilience is something that I have to model a lot. There are days when I wake up and I don't want to go to work. Something happened in my personal life that makes it tough for me to show up. Something is happening in our community, in our world, that makes it tough for me to show up for work. But being that face of resilience, of positivity, and even when maybe no one else in the world believes in them and tells them that they can do it, I'm going to be that person for them no matter what.
I love everything you just said. I mean, there's so many points I could touch on with that. To start off, you mentioned authenticity and vulnerability, which are 2 out of the 5 actions of IVATI. So you already covered those bases. And when I think of this episode, I really think of authenticity because you're such an authentic person. And I know I'm saying that from somebody who personally knows you and adores you, but I think anybody who works with you, and especially your students, sees that authenticity. You said, I don't have to be perfect. And that's another thing I think many people misunderstand about leaders, that they have to be perfect. They're human, they're gonna make mistakes. So you mentioned that, but another thing I love is that you said with students, they're always watching you. So you always have to put on a good example for them. But I think people forget that in adulthood, those you lead are still watching you. With children, I think we're constantly reminded, don't say this because they're like little sponges who soak everything. But it's really not even what you say as an adult, it's what you don't say. They are soaking in everything you're doing as a leader, and so you always need to set a good example. So I think really you translate that from adults to children and back, and I think that's just so amazing as a leader. So you talk about the population you serve and how, sometimes it's hard to get to work and put on that brave face for them. And I know with any teacher, you take on a lot of burden outside of just teaching. So how do you emotionally lead your students while doing so in an emotionally sustainable way?
Definitely. This is something that I'm still growing in as a professional, as a leader, but first, I kind of go back to that piece about resilience. I was just raised by two parents and in a family who always instilled resilience in me and always taught me the importance of resilience. So thinking back to kind of that natural born leader part, that resilience has almost come easy to me, but what I have developed and what I've done differently as I grew in my professional career is when I'm working with kids, I am really intentional about talking and sharing with my words what that looks like and what that means. So for example, that might look like we had a bad day in class, right? My lessons didn't go right, my students were kind of wonky, behaviors were all over, and so I will have a closing circle with my children at the end of the day, and we'll sit down and I'll say, hey team, here's what I noticed today. We really struggled here, here, and here. I'll ask them questions, how do you feel like today went? But then I'll say with my words, I know today for me wasn't my best day. When I go home, something I love to do is read. I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna go on a walk and I'm gonna read a book, and I'm telling you class, tomorrow when I come back, I'm gonna be better. Just letting them know when we have hard days, because we do have hard days, that it's not the end of the world, but it's about what do we do to come back stronger the next day.
That's amazing. And that is something that should carry over to adult leadership. People want to see leaders say, this was a bad day, I was not at my best. People need to see that from a leader because they will respect that. When everyone else knows you're having a bad day and you're trying to pretend that you're not doing any service to your team. They can tell. They most likely want to help you, just like you're telling your kids, I had a bad day, but what I'm going to do, you're showcasing great leadership by showing them what you're going to do to make it better. What advice do you have for parents in leading their children? Because leading children who aren't your own, I'm assuming, is very different than leading children that are your own. Different relational dynamics, different frustrations. So what is some advice that you would have for parents on how to lead their children effectively?
Sure. Something that I practice in my classrooms, that I practice with not only students but teachers as well, in my relationship with parents, in my relationship with coworkers, is to always lead with love, right? And understanding that even as a teacher, there are times when I have to get on my students. There are times where they mess up and I have to be the disciplinarian. I have to sit them out for recess. I have to tell them they can't sit by their friends at lunch. I have to be that person, and I'm always very intentional about making sure that I build relationships with my students so that whatever I'm doing, they understand that I'm doing it because I care and because I want them to be better. So when I think about the advice that I would give to parents is just be so overly empathetic and just so overly understanding, and make sure that you're always bringing it back to love, and that you create so many opportunities where your student, where your child sees and knows that you love them, that in those times where you do have to take away their toys, you do have to tell them, no, it's time for bed, that it's not a guessing game of, oh, they're doing this because they don't love me. No, they're doing this because they love me so much, they want me to be better. And I think it's a balancing act, right, of making sure that we are pouring all of these positive nuggets and all of these positive deposits into our students, so that when we do have to pull back or take away, there's not a void there. It's just truly, oh, okay, Miss Knight, me as a teacher, I'm doing this because she loves me and because she wants me to be better, and there's there's no questions about that.
I love that. That could be the phrase of the year, lead with love. I think we need more love in leadership. What do you continuously do to make sure that you are always bettering yourself as a leader, being more effective as a leader? What do you personally do?
Sure. So kind of at a objective level, I am in grad school in a program where I complete courses to eventually get a master's degree and get a certification in leadership. So that's kind of, the more technical side. But also, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I try to do my best and formally and informally make sure that whoever I am leading understands that they can give me feedback as well. I'm a huge advocate for informal feedback, formal feedback, passing you in the hallway, send me an email, but just really wanting to better myself because I don't know what I'm doing wrong if no one tells me, right? I think while yes, I understand that I want to be better and by no means am I perfect, I only know what I need to work on by asking people. So for example, if I have a crucial conversation and I have to have a tough, give some tough feedback after kind of that formal conversation is over, I'll look and I'll say, how do you think that went? Hey, it was really hard for me when I had to tell you blank, 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 blank. Did that land with you? Did that hurt? Could I have said it differently? Well, they truly can say, yeah, that kind of hurt when you said that. I know you didn't mean it. Here's how you could have said it to where you would still get your point across where it didn't hurt. And again, I think only because those relationships have been so built on trust, again, understanding that the same feedback I give you, you give me, it's to make me better. So just always trying to be open for feedback.
I love that. You were able to switch from being the leader and the student. And I think that's key is you need to remember you're always earning to be better, and you're always moving forward in a direction where you want to develop, and know that you're never at your final destination. Like you're never officially know everything as a leader. There will always be experiences that really challenge you. And so being able to, we had mentioned before, empower those you lead to help lead you. It should be a constant loop. That I'm gonna get better, helping you get better, and you're gonna help me get better as I help you get better. It should be constant, so I love that. So my final question for you is looking towards the future. Now we are both, and we know this personally, we are not people who are, I want to be doing this within 5 years, 10 years. Some people function that way. We are not very much that person. As you can hear in her leadership story, you didn't set out to be an educator. You let, faith in your journey lead you there. But with that being said, do you have an ultimate goal? In timelines, regardless, that doesn't matter. Do you have some big goal that you want to achieve?
I do know that whatever I do for the rest of my life, it will be serving children. For me, it will be serving Black and brown children. Whether that means I'm in a classroom, whether that means I am in grade level chair, I'm in a regional leadership position, I'm in a district-wide regional position, whatever that means, I do know that's what I will be doing. I also do have, I guess you could call it like a tangible goal of one day wanting to open my own school. I think, obviously I'm still new to education, although this is my 6th year, but each day, each school year, each month, each quarter, I am learning and growing and kind of taking best practices, my own experiences, my colleagues' experiences, and just finding the value in the good days and the bad days and thinking about what that means for me as I continue to develop as a leader. Knowing that the school that I will open one day has a huge focus on character development. As I mentioned, just as important as it is for reading and writing and math, also focusing on values. What does it mean to show love? What does it mean to show teamwork? What does it mean for you to be a leader? You're 5 and you're in kindergarten. You can still lead, but just making sure that I will always be intentional about teaching my students how to be good people, how to be little people, I think is something that's often forgot about in education. People who are not in the field, I think they sometimes see it as, oh, your teacher, again, taught you how to read, taught you how to add, taught you multiplication tables.
All about like the curriculum versus the social emotional.
Right, but there's so much more than that, and I know you know that, and the emotional work in the job is what keeps me coming back.
Well, if that's not inspiring from your leadership journey, your education journey, your life experiences, and everything in between, I have to say you are so inspiring as a leader. And I mean that as a good friend. I mean, we've been through a lot, college, we've grown a lot together. And even though we're states apart, I'm so lucky to have you here to actually speak to you in person. I just really appreciate you sharing your insight as an educator and sharing your insight as a leader. And I know this would be so valuable to so many people watching, whether you're an educator or not. And I just appreciate you coming on to IVATI.
It's been such a pleasure to like see you in this professional light and just see what you've done with IVATI. As you mentioned, we've been through so much together, college, ups and downs, fun times, and to just see not only how we've grown in our friendship, but just to see the way that you've grown as a leader, as a professional. I just couldn't be more honored to be here on IVATI Invites.
With that being said, thank you so much for tuning in to IVATI Invites, where we invite different leaders to share their story and for us to learn from them. Please don't forget to subscribe to IVATI's YouTube channel, where you can see episodes of IVATI Invites and IVATI Inspires. Thank you.